Hello, hello, hello. Who's the moderator for this session? Oh, hi, Yoshi. I was just wondering who the moderator was. Yoshi, it's just going to be me. By the way, it's just going to be me and Sin Fox on camera for now. We might do a video Q&A at the very end if we have time, but I don't think we're going to have time because he and I can both talk forever. So we will watch the chat for questions, and if we completely ignore all the questions, then we will just, if you can hop in and say, hey, do something. Cake. Please share that cake. Hi, Mirren. And Jazzy. And Jeremy. And Alan. Good to see you. So I'm curious, before we get started, is there anything in particular that you guys are curious about that you wanted to come to the panel for and find out more about, or just generally interested? Yeah, I hear you, Jazzy. It can be very difficult. What kind of business do you have? As we're going to go over a little more of the legal side of things, but I'm just curious what you do have. And first, yeah. My recommendation on that, I'd reach out to other artists, other fursuit makers. Networking is your friend, at least in terms of figuring out what works for them. Something like that might work well for you as well. I'm going to give Sin another minute before I bug him again. Yeah, like I said, I wish I had more advice for you guys on marketing. That is not my area of expertise, but you may be able to. We may have some ideas on. There may be ways that you can reach out to small business development centers, which I should really make sure I note, and they may be able to connect you with certain things. So apologies for the delay. We will hopefully have Sin on in just a minute. Before I do get into the meat and potatoes, then Jazzy and not Socks. Who else was it that said they were looking at marketing? Wags, Jazzy and Wags. Where are you guys located generally? Florida. Orlando. So what I'd recommend in Orlando, there's a network out there called the Small Business Resource Network. I'm part of it with my law firm, and we are essentially a group of professionals who primarily market to small businesses. And we're very active up here in North Florida. Orlando does have some active members, as well as the Tampa area is especially active as well. It's connected with the Small Business Development Centers that's run by the government, funded by the government, helps people get started. So looking for someone there, it's called sbrn.org. There are a number of marketing people there, and that might be a good place to look. Or just in general, looking for an SBDC in your area would be another good place to look. They may have advice on how to get started with marketing. I'm wondering if Sin had the wrong time on this. I will give him another minute, and I'll give people another couple of minutes to jump in because I see the numbers are still going up. So yeah, different. No, yes, he is in a different time zone, but he probably. I think he just got confused on the time because it changed on us kind of last minute. Yeah. FCC testing. Yeah, the FCC is an interesting thing to work with. That can be very. There can be a lot of ins and outs with that, and you would definitely want to talk to an expert about that. Most of the rest of these that I'm seeing so far are definitely things that we will be covering. And let's see, just want to make sure I haven't missed anyone. So AFK, okay. Hmm. 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 Hello, new people. Hello, hello. As we're still waiting for my co-host to join, so please post in the chat. Curious what kinds of questions you have that you're interested with this panel. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on the legal aspects of starting up a business, but also want to see if there's anything we can answer about more of the general aspects of building a business and things that you might have. We already talked a little about marketing and some recommendations where I don't do the marketing, but there may be resources for you. Alan, we're not going to get into the technical aspects of licensing for food trucks, but again, that is definitely something that we've dealt with at my firm and things that you might be able to find elsewhere. Yes, absolutely, Yoshi. Freelance artist stuff I'm going to hit on specifically, should definitely be interested in this sort of thing. All right, so Sin is either in transit or something's going on there. I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we have some time, and I was going to take the lead on most of the front half of this anyways, so here we go. My name is Brother Flounder, also known as Andrew Glazier. I'm an attorney in Florida. I primarily focus on small businesses, helping them get things right and fix mistakes before they happen so that they can get the full value of their business in the end. Things I'm going to say today are not the views of Megaplex, they are not the views of my firm, and they are not the views of my clients. So just have to get that out of the way at the start. Everybody is obviously, you're here one reason or another. You want to learn more about how to build a business. And for that, one of the best ways to get started, like I said, I help people fix problems in advance. And if that means basically I'm going to be advertising for lawyers a little bit here. But the basics of building a business, obviously, what everyone wants in the end is really to make money. They want to be able to make a living on their business. And that is a very, obviously, the most important reason that we do this, even more than love of it and that sort of thing. Obviously, there are nonprofits, but even then, you have to make money as a nonprofit in order to continue. And so, in order to make sure you do that, you need to be able to protect yourself. And the most important aspect in running a business is making sure that you take steps to protect yourself. We're a very sue-happy society, and in the United States at least. And some of what I'm going to say applies to, it's primarily going to be the United States and Florida, but it also applies more generally, but specifically the United States is very, very sue-happy. It's just the way our system works. And people will, if you are a freelance person out there, let's say you're running a food truck business, your food truck hits somebody else's car, they might sue you because they have injuries from that. And so if it's just you, Alan, out there owning this food truck, and you don't have a business, they could sue you personally. One of the important things about starting the business is that you can get legal protections so that they have to sue the business and they can't sue you personally. And that's one of the biggest areas where I come in as a lawyer, is to help you figure out the best way to do that. So what you really want to do is to form some kind of business entity, whether you're going to be we've all heard of them, corporations, limited liability companies, partnerships. There are all kinds of entities out there that you can run your business in. But whether you are an artist who's just starting out, whether you're running a food truck, if you're doing a voice acting business, if you are starting a marketing firm, if you are starting a CPA firm, and us lawyers too, you want to be in some sort of legal entity, because that is how you're going to gain some liability protections. It's considered something separate from you individually as a person, and you have certain rights with it, and you have certain protections with it. The worst thing you can do is to just be out there yourself, like I said, just Alan the Dragon, individually, no protections, no entity, no nothing. Not only is it problematic from a liability standpoint, but when you go to try and raise money, when you go to try and sign contracts, you aren't going to be as successful as if you, have a business entity behind you, or in front of you, really. Sorry, my mind's. Anyways, so the next worst thing you can do is to get yourself in a situation where you accidentally take on responsibility for someone else's stuff. Let's say Alan and I wanted to go into business together. Well, one of the ways we could do that is by forming a partnership. Well, and this partnership is an entity that you create just by creating it, just by saying, Alan and I, we're in a partnership now. Yes, we are both going to run this business, Alan and Flounder. And you don't have to file anything. You don't have to write up an agreement. You don't have to do any of that, and it's very easy to create. The problem with that is, if I go and wreck the food truck and hit somebody, if I screw up and create problems for the business where we're going to owe somebody a lot of money, Alan is just as much on the hook for that as I am. So that's obviously a big problem. What we can do is form a corporation which will protect you. And that's the biggest reason to do that. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are, whether you're doing art, writing stories, whether you have a physical storefront, you want to make sure you have liability protection. And so instead of us being in a partnership, we would own parts of a stock in a corporation. So there are a few different entities. From a legal protection standpoint, most of them really work the same way. Generally, you have an option to be a corporation or a limited liability company. Most states, I think pretty much all states except maybe Louisiana, recognize both of these, and the differences are a little more on the tax side of things than they are on the corporate side of things. So you would want, for the Cookie Dragons, you would want to form the Cookie Dragon Confectionery Inc. You would own all of the stock of that if this is you alone, but since you now have a separate entity, the business is the one going out, the business is the one that owns the food truck, the business is the one who's making contracts with everybody. And the good thing about being in a business is that you can't, and generally, unless you really, really screw up or you're actively trying to defraud someone, you are protected personally. The only stuff you can lose is the money you've put into the business itself. They can't go after you personally if the business fails, which is obviously a very, very important way to protect yourself in this. If you're an artist and somebody says, hey, you didn't do what I wanted and you didn't produce the drawings, I'm going to sue you because I want my money back. Well, that's another way to protect yourself if they've tried to incur a lot of money trying to get their money back. So, there are a couple differences in a corporation and an LLC. Like I said, I'm going to get to the tax stuff in a minute, but with the corporation side, generally, sometimes people prefer one or the other just because it feels better. Sometimes you'll hear about people being put in a limited liability company and think it's sort of something else. One of the nice things about a corporation, especially if you are a single person, is that it's really, really easy to do. Corporations have been around a lot longer than limited liability companies, and so a corporation has more default provisions in the law than a limited liability company does. So if you're a single member, really what you need is articles of incorporation, simple form bylaws, and then you can go and start opening a bank account. What you can do is basically to start the business, and backing up a little bit because I skipped this part, you will you go on the Secretary of State's website or some other similar site when a state that you are living in and file to create a corporation, to create a limited liability company, articles of incorporation or articles of organization, depending on which one you are going to form. Corporation, like I said, more default provisions. You don't have to do as much legal work within the entity because there's a lot of default provisions, which means a lot of your protections and a lot of the ways you would run the company if you had more stockholders are in the law by default. You don't have to define all of them. It's also usually a little cheaper to file that online. And this is where I'm going to, a limited liability company, again, you do the same thing. You go online, you can file for that and all sorts of things. Now, here's where I'm going to make the plug for the lawyers. You can go out and go to the Secretary of State's websites and find these forms and do it yourself. And that's certainly a possibility, and that's certainly better than nothing. It's not better than just going out there and doing this yourself or saying you're in a partnership with someone, because it does give you some level of protection, and you will get some of that default protection. But when the problems with that include, the biggest one is you may not get the tax structure that you think you're getting if you just file that yourself. And also, part of what I'm here to do as a lawyer, and if you go to a lawyer to do this, is that we have some value add, basically. Even if you're a single person forming this and you don't have multiple people problems, which I'm going to get to in a minute, we can help talk to you about the tax structure. We can help you make your filings with the IRS. We talk to you about employees. We talk to you about local business tax receipts, things that you need to know that are local and not just the filings on the website. We try to educate you on building a business. Some of the things I'm talking about today are things that I would talk about with somebody who walks in the door to start a new business. And so instead of just filing the forms and hoping for the best, and when we do that, and we see sometimes where people get screwed up, they didn't form what they think they did, or they are formed it, but they don't know how to make sure that they're actually operating as the corporation. And that's another thing we can show you, is to make sure that you're actually signing documents and operating under the corporate name, so that you don't come back later and find out everything was actually under your personal name instead of what it should be. Yes, Jazzy, I am Brother Flounder on Twitter. So, forming a single person, really easy, and yes, you can do it with the Secretary of State website. What happens when you have multiple people? Let's say you have two or three people coming to form a business. That's where it gets a little complicated. And one sec. So in these cases, you want to, everything at the start is great. You have this great idea for a product. You have this wonderful camaraderie. We all are going to put in money. We're all going to work hard for this. We're all going to do everything right. We're never going to have any problems whatsoever. Spoiler alert, you're going to have problems. And it's a lot easier to fix the problems before they actually happen. It's if you are able to come to a lawyer and talk to them and spend some time considering what you're going to do if problems arise. And not only what happens when problems arise, but consider how you're going to actually run the day-to-day business. What we would do in either a corporation or a limited liability company is put in some sort of agreement where you all decide a lot of things in advance. You decide who's actually going to run the operations of the company. Are all three of you going to be heavily involved in the business? Are all three of you going to be in that food truck or in that bakery turning things out day in, day out? Are you all going to be able to sign contracts and hire employees and deal with insurance and work on getting financing and things like that for the business? If so, then maybe all three of you should have day-to-day authority. But if it's two people coming in and really just putting in money and hoping to get a return, and one person with the idea working in the business, then maybe you don't do it like that. Maybe you do just have the one person with the day-to-day authority, and you go back to the other people. You protect them by having massive things like selling the company or going into another line of business or taking on $2 million in debt requires the approval of everybody. And so you separate out the day-to-day stuff from the big stuff. And let me know if, again, in the chat, if you want me to go into a little more detail or slow down, that sort of thing. But the advantage is here, one of the things you're going to do is figure out before you actually really are into the company, who's going to be responsible for what. And you may, if you're all in the business, you decide at the beginning, okay, I'm going to do the finances, you're going to do the talking, and you're going to run the bakery. And you create positions for that, and you are able to agree a little more before you actually get into it. And then 3 months in, you're like, wait, I was supposed to do that. No, I was supposed to do that. And so that's one of the things that you can do in advance and you want to do in advance. Another thing to do in advance is figure out what happens when you need more money. At some point, often businesses are going to start running short on cash, new startup businesses. It takes a lot of money to start a business. Even if you're a single person, to get it really started off the ground, hire a lawyer, hire a CPA to deal with the tax stuff, it does take a bit of money. And so once you get into it as the more people come in, now you're signing more agreements. Like we recommend signing one of these agreements saying what everyone's going to do. It does take more money to do it. And what happens after you've left us? You're going out there and you're working for 3 months and you're starting to make a profit, but then all the bills come due and you need more cash. Are your partners, are your other members in the company or your other stockholders, are they going to put in more money? Can you require them to put in more money? What happens if two of you put in more money but one doesn't? Do you have the right to basically dilute his share if you were all 1/3 at the beginning? Well, if you don't want to put in money, then we should be able to buy more, and instead of having 1/3, now he has 1/4 of the business because we put in more money. There are ways to consider whether you want to allow that or whether instead you do some sort of loan to the company where you put in this money as a loan, and instead of getting money back as a dividend or a distribution, you instead get this money back with interest before any of that gets paid. And so that's another thing, is just making sure, and again, who has the authority to go out and seek financing from other sources? Is it just the one person who's running it? Is it all three of you who are running it? Or is it the one person who's running it and also the two people who are in the background? Another thing to consider with this is what happens when it all goes wrong. Because when things go wrong, it's very much like a divorce. And you're really fighting over who has right to do certain things in the company. And we've had people come back to us at the end and say, my partner is being terrible. Let's say you're in two people together where it can be really difficult. If you got three people together, usually one person, you got two people on one side, one person on another side, it's easier to deal with disputes. And you have some provisions where the other guy is like, okay, I'm out. You can force them to sell to the other two people who are running the business and agree on what's going on before you sell to a third party. When you have two people in a business, it's probably the most complicated of all, because if you don't agree on what happens, the only solution in law, whether you're a corporation or a limited liability company, is basically to dissolve the company. If you can't agree on what happens, then you're done. You have to dissolve it, pay everything out, and you go your separate ways. We can help you build in alternatives to that. We can help you say, okay, on these big issues, if we're really, really stuck, if there's absolutely nothing we can do because I hate you and you hate me, we're never going to agree, you build in ways to work around that, where one person will end up buying the other person out if you absolutely have to. And so you are planning. What we do is we plan for the worst case scenarios. It's very similar to that. Again, this is all about protecting yourself. When you get to a point later, and if you don't have these provisions in there, it's a lot more expensive to get out of it than it would be if you had it at the start when you're building the business. And so it's worth spending a little more money up front so that you're not spending a lot of money later trying to get rid of somebody who is dragging your business down. Hi, Fibercat. Nice to meet you. So, let's see. What next? Oh, taxes. Okay. Here's the other side of that. I'm going to circle back a little bit. So we've talked, these issues that I'm talking about with dealing with one partner, two partners, three partners, really are applicable to both corporations and limited liability companies. You just use different legal documents for making this arrangement. One of the big areas where these two corporate forms differ is taxes. A corporation, generally, if you just file a corporation, and this is where you can get in trouble if you file things yourself without talking to somebody, a lawyer or a CPA, by default, a corporation is called a C corporation. It's a reference to a section in the tax code, and they are subject to corporate tax at the federal level and at the state level, which is 20% at the federal level right now, and I think 6% in Florida. And so you would be paying, instead of being, this is the disadvantage of being in a traditional corporation. Yes, you have the liability protection, but you also have to pay more on the taxes. So there's an alternative to that called an S corporation, in which you get the liability protection from the corporation, but you also get tax benefits. You are able to pass through, what it's called to pass through the corporate stuff to your personal tax return. Essentially, you bypass the tax at the federal corporate level. And if you own a company 50-50, you get half of whatever the corporation made or lost, and the other person also gets half of what the corporation made or lost. And there are some states that will still impose taxes on S corporations. Florida is not one of them. You are exempt from the corporate tax, which is very nice. Again, another reason to consult especially a CPA when you're figuring out the tax stuff. Alan, only big corporations don't pay taxes. Little guys pay taxes. And again, only if you're making money would you pay taxes. So the flip side is an LLC. I talked a little about the beginning about partnerships, and this is where two people just get together and they say, I want to form a partnership. But that exposes you to a lot of liability because you're responsible for what everybody else does. On the flip side, one of the reasons you might want to be in a partnership is because there are a lot of flexible ways that you can structure it from a tax standpoint. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but you can come up with all sorts of flexible funding options. You can come up with certain ways for somebody to get more money at the start versus less money at the end. If you are coming in, especially where it's nice, is if you're coming in and some people are putting in $100,000 each and one person's just putting in services, you can structure it from a tax perspective where those people putting in the money are going to get their tax benefits first before the person who's just putting in services. Whereas if you did this as an S corporation, the people who are putting in $100,000 are in the same tax position as the person who put in and got his stock for just the services he's performing to the company. And so a lot of people like the partnership tax arena. This is where you would want to use a limited liability company because it allows you to structure the company to be similar to a partnership, and from a tax perspective, you would be a partnership, but you get all of the wonderful corporate form protections and the limited liability, which is why it's called the limited liability company. These popped up, I want to say, probably over 30 years ago now. It was part of a tax code revision in 1986 that really made the LLC. The LLC was in existence before then, but tax revisions in the mid-'80s allowed them to use this partnership tax structure, and that's really when they took off. The flip side of that is that when LLCs were beginning to be used, a lot of lawyers basically took their corporation forms and copied them for limited liability companies. And you see a lot of those old forms running around and lying around on the internet. Those forms can be used, but they're not good because they confuse people between LLC and corporation. And in many states, they don't always apply correctly anymore because especially Florida and a number of other states have adopted a revised Limited Liability Company Act that changes certain things. And so those old forms don't work. Another reason to talk to your friendly neighborhood lawyer. Let's see, 5:30. Does anybody have any questions for me so far while I take a sip and take a quick stop talking for a minute? Happy to expound on things. Alex, you say keep knowledge of the laws. Part of my job is to know the law, and part of my job is to be aware of all these changes. But really, my job is to help you be protected. My job is to help you be successful. And so yes, it is to keep the knowledge of the laws, but it's also to learn how to apply them. The reason I'm able to fix problems in advance is because of experience. We've seen a lot of these problems that happened before. Everything that I've talked about so far has been a problem. We have seen all of this. We've seen and had to fix things. And so that's why we push so hard to do it in advance, write these agreements in advance, where we're not going to have that problem anymore. It might happen. It might. But I mentioned specifically this bit where if you're in two people and you can't agree, one of you buys the other one out. My boss has been practicing for almost 40 years now. He's seen that used once ever where somebody actually had to do it. These agreements are very good in convincing people to settle their problems, settle their disputes among themselves before you get to that point. Yes, the cup is yes. So. All right, so tax structures, going to continue on that for a moment. This is where you really want to bring in an accountant because us as the lawyers, we do know what the tax structures are and what they could be, but there may be some tax reasons for one reason or another that you might want to be something else. You might prefer partnership over S corporation, or you might even in some weird situations want to be in a traditional C corporation. You really don't want to be in a C corporation in Florida because you get way bigger taxes. And again, keeping up with the knowledge of the law for a little bit there, when in 2017, when the Republicans were doing all sorts of changes to the tax code, it looked like it might actually bring the C corporation back as the thing you wanted to be in. They did some changes after that made pass-through entities viable again, but that is a reason to talk to a lawyer to make sure these things haven't changed on you since the last time you looked, the last time you started a business. So, fees and costs. Some tax issues. Oh, more tax issues. Florida, like I said, has a corporate income tax, but it really only applies to C corporations. S corporations, limited liability companies, pass-through entities are exempted from corporate tax. That is not the case in every state, and so you want to be sure you find somebody who can tell you about the specific laws and rules in that state. In addition, you have state income taxes in a lot of places. So if you are in one of those states that exempts you from corporate tax, it might not exempt you from having to pay the personal income tax. And that can affect, again, how you structure your company, because you want to make sure you don't incur a massive burden on your personal return as well as the corporate return. And there are some cities as well that will impose taxes on businesses, that they will impose an income tax of some kind. But with cities, what you see a lot more often, what we see in Jacksonville and a lot of other areas, is what's called a business tax receipt, a local business tax receipt. Sometimes you'll see this as a certificate of some kind that the city requires you to have to operate in the city. So a lot of people don't know about these kind of things, but if you've ever seen posted in a business, local business tax receipt, that's what this is. Basically, it's a fee to the city to say, hey, yes, I'm operating in your city and I'm here for a year, and you renew every year. That's one of the things that you would want to watch out for when starting a business is local stuff like that. You can find a lawyer somewhere else, but if you find a local lawyer, they will know a lot more about the specific local requirements that all businesses are required to deal with. And if there are regulations on, say, food trucks or restaurants or medical practices, the local lawyer might know a little bit more about those as well. Taxes also, one of the other downsides of starting your own business is that you have to pay quarterly estimated taxes. That's something, again, that you should talk to an accountant about, but a lawyer can help you look at and just explain to you, hey, yeah, you need to put aside money to pay these taxes. Eagle, that's an interesting question. This is a business does not have to make money this is one of these areas where corporations and companies, and maybe I should expound on this a little bit. Corporations are a state creation. They are not federal. And so each state has their own set of rules for what a corporation or a company is. In Florida, my experience is Florida and Georgia, so I'm describing the way it is in these states. At the federal level, they really just care about your tax structure, and this will make sense in a minute. The IRS is cool from the perspective of the state. No, you don't have to make money, except for the taxes. If you're not making money as the business, then you're fine. From a legal perspective, you're probably okay. From a federal tax perspective, if you have a business that's just running loss after loss after loss after loss, eventually the IRS is going to get real suspicious about that, and they're probably going to audit you. Because what that looks like is a shell corporation where you're laundering money through something and taking losses on it and trying to cheat them out of taxes. If you do have a business that's just barely breaking even, this is where it's key to keep very detailed accounting records of what you actually are spending, where your money's coming from, and what you're spending your money on. Because it's certainly there are businesses that don't make money. Absolutely. There are a lot of businesses that never make money. But this is something where, again, this is much more on the accounting side. This is where it's very important to have an accountant who will talk to you and help you navigate, help you know what you need to save, so that if you do get audited, if you do get a nasty gram from the IRS or from a state tax authority, you'll be able to come in and say, hey, look, I've got this receipt, I've got this. I'm really not making money. I'm not trying to cheat you here. I'm just barely breaking even, and that's why this is that. Again, if you're just breaking even, you're probably more okay than if you're taking major losses. What you can't do is basically make a company and say, I'm going to use. I like computers. I'm like gaming on the computer. I'm going to build a company, and I'm going to say I'm running this consulting business, but really I'm just going to use it to buy my computers, and I'm going to use it to buy my desks, and I'm going to use it to buy this and the other thing. And I'm not actually making any money. I give myself, $1,000 a year payment from my other business to say, I'm making money. I'm making $1,000 a year. The IRS is going to see that for what it is. It's a shell. It's a scam, and they're not going to allow that. That's where their big concern is. So if you do have legitimate losses, but you can show them that you actually do also have money coming in, you are running a business, you'll be more protected. And that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, no, a business does not have to make money, but you do need to be very careful that you're not just making big losses. Does that make sense, Eagle? Okay, good. Alan, I actually don't really know much about the Cottage Food Act. I'd have to look that one up, to be perfectly honest. And this is another area where one of the things I have to do when I'm a lawyer is sometimes I do not know everything. I really don't. I do business law. I don't do litigation. I hate litigation. I don't want to go to court. I never want to see a judge. And this panel that's going to be coming up tonight at 11, there's a lot more litigation people in there. In fact, I think Sin, who is not here right now, and I are the only two people in that who are not litigation attorneys on some level. And Logitech has decided that it's not going to focus on me anymore, so I don't know what's going on here. Am I very out of focus to anyone else? All right, hopefully that'll just fix itself in a minute here. Where was I? Litigation. I hate litigation. I don't like it, never have. And so I leave that to people who love litigation, like these lawyers who you're going to see tonight. I'll write nasty grams, but I don't go to court. And I'm not competent to go to court. And so that's where I call in experts. I call in friends who I know who are good at that sort of thing. With this sort of regulation, with the Cottage Food Act, that is something that I can research, something I can learn about. And that's going to be something I probably can help you with. But if I can't, then I will send you somewhere else to get some more information. I'm going to try one more time to get this thing to zoom back in on me. Hello, camera. One moment. All right, there we go. Restarted the camera. Hopefully that'll help. If it doesn't, oh well, I apologize. So, that's all the questions we have for now. All right, we've got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to go back to some more startup issues. Something I didn't really discuss at the beginning is the name of the business, and this is another big crucial area because I have had a client lately where they're in a contract and the business on the other side doesn't actually exist. The other side had a typo in their legal name. And this is very bad for the other business. It's very bad for my business on some levels, but in this case, I was trying to get my business out of this contract or at least find ways to delay performance because of COVID. If you don't have that in your contract, it affects your ability to sue and be sued in the state of Florida or the state of Georgia. But names are very, very important. You want to make sure you have your actual correct corporate name on anything you sign, because if you sign it personally, then you're not signing it in the corporation, you're signing it yourself. And it can be difficult to later transfer that into the corporation. Not impossible, and most people will work with you on it, but you do have that problem. Also, you want to make sure nobody else is using your name. There have been some issues lately, some big trademark disputes. There's one with the band Lady Antebellum, changed their name to Lady A. Well, there's a singer who's been using the name Lady A for 25 years, and they're now in a big dispute over who has the right to use it, because the original Lady A had never registered her name as a trademark. And I'm not going to go into the details of whether or not our patent trademark system is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just going to explain the way it is, and this is sometimes something I have to do with my clients. It's like, look, I'm not judging if this is good or bad, and you don't need to be judging whether this is good or bad. This is the way it is. This is how you have to do it. Thankfully, there's very few things where I have to tell my clients this is the way you have to do it, but sometimes it happens. So, with the name, you want to form a state level. You search the database of corporate names, and if the name is registered and active, you can't use it. Say I want to pay my firm Glazier, and Dietrich. Nobody else in Florida can use the name Glazier, and Dietrich because we have that name. What we have not done is go to the federal level and trademark it, which is probably not something we will ever need to do because Glazier, and Dietrich is not something that other people are going to use. But a business like Publix registered its name in Florida, and actually a better example is an example, of course, just went right out of my head, but Whataburger is the example I was trying to think of. Whataburger started in Texas. Well, there was also a Whataburger in North Carolina, and they had started before Whataburger, Texas. Whataburger, Texas couldn't use the name Whataburger in the Carolinas for a long time because of that other company. So there are state and federal ways to do it that you have to consider. But from for our purposes, the name you want, you go, and that's what you put in your articles of incorporation or articles of organization when you start the business with the state. You find a name and you find a unique name. Now, that doesn't have to be the name you actually operate under. If I wanted to operate as Glacier and Dietrich, I could file something like GGD Enterprises, and then I could just do business as Glacier and Dietrich, and or file a fictitious name registration with the state, which shows people Glacier and Dietrich is actually this company. And there are various legal reasons you'd want to do that, but you don't necessarily have to operate under the name you file as. Most people do. But there are sometimes situations where that doesn't work, or you have multiple businesses in one holding company where you're not actually going to be able to do that. So the safest thing to do is to then file a fictitious name registration. And the very safest thing to do is to then go to the Patent and Trademark Office and file patents and trademarks, or file trademarks on your name. That's expensive, and a lot of people don't really do that. But one thing you should do is at least go and look on the database and make sure you're not accidentally using a name somebody else has chosen, because that can be messy for you later when you try to expand, because they will have prior rights to use that name if it has been registered federally. And if you have to change your name later, that's a lot of problems for the goodwill of your business. So, wow, I'm way further out of time than I thought it was. I apologize. One more thing real quick on registering companies. If you are registered in Florida and you want to do business in another state, you have to register as a foreign corporation in that state. If you want to go into Georgia, you register as a foreign corporation or a foreign limited liability company. If you don't, then you cannot sue in that state, but other people can sue you, which is really annoying sometimes. Also, you may get hit with penalties, you may get hit with fines if you're operating in that state without registering to do business, so that the people in the state, the point of that is that the people in the state want to know who you are, so that if something happens, if somebody tries to serve, if somebody sues you, they know who to actually sue, and also so the state knows who's doing business in their state and how the taxes are going to work. You also probably heard a lot about the Delaware Corporations. A lot of big companies are incorporated in Delaware. There's a lot of tax advantages to being incorporated in Delaware for C corporations. It's not usually a concern for small corporations, and it's very expensive to register in Delaware. So I usually recommend that my clients just register in the state of Florida, which is very corporate friendly all on its own. Contracts. I want to say a little bit about contracts before we hop off here, because there are a few things in contracts that you would want to look out for. When you are negotiating a contract with somebody, and this is something that I would recommend you do for any sort of service you're providing, whether you are an artist, a maker, a business owner with a lease, there are things in a contract. If you are providing a service more than just a storefront where you're selling goods, a contract will protect you in many ways, because like the agreements between your partners, it's going to set out exactly what you expect from the other person. It's going to set out details of payment. It's going to set out details of what you're providing. It's going to provide a term for either for delivering a product, or it's going to provide, if you are working with, say, a consultant or something for a lengthy period of time, it will provide a term for that. If you are hiring somebody for their knowledge to develop something for you, if, say, you're a software developer and you're trying to hire somebody to develop code for you, if you hire them as an employee, you're fine. You own the code. If you hire them as a contractor, you don't automatically own the code. And so that's something you want to make sure you have to have in your contract. Let's see. Online business. No, I'm afraid I didn't see that question. Could you please repost it, and I'll come back to that in just a little bit. So with contracts, there are a lot of things to look at, but things in contracts, when you start negotiating them, you can break it down into really three sort of buckets: the must-haves, the want-to-haves, and the nice-to-haves. Must-haves would be the core of what this is for. If you're a software developer, you absolutely must, or a software company, you must and want to get all the rights to the code that's being developed. That's your must-have. A want-to-have might be something like a non-compete, where you say, okay, you're developing this for us, you can't turn around and develop it for somebody else. If they're just developing code for you, that probably isn't as important as, say, they are your vice president of operations and have access to all of your financial data and your business plans. That's where a non-compete, where you can't go work for the competitors, would be much more important than simply a software developer. Local business requirements. Wags, I will get back to that in just a minute. I see what you're asking now. And then there are things that are, nice to have. These would be, certain things like, okay, I'd really like to have him pay within 30 days, but if they're really going to insist on it, then, we can pay within 40 days. Or, it's, okay, fine, we're not going to have this arbitration clause. That's fine, which I don't like arbitration clauses anyways, but struggling, running up against the clock here, and I don't want to bore you with all the details of that. But with the contracts, again, this is where you want to, what you must have is the most important things for your business. With an artist, and again, it's going to be different on each side. So with an artist, you want to make sure that if, depending on how you're doing it, if you're just doing, let's say you're an artist doing a digital commission, usually they don't, a lot of artists don't want that person to then take that art that they've paid, $80-100 for, turn around and start using it commercially. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want to charge more for somebody to use it commercially and not just for personal use. That would be very important to put in your contract. That would be a must-have for you. Your terms, let's say, okay, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you the pencil sketch or something like that, then the line art, and then the final, and you get one round of changes at each point. And I'm going to have to charge you more if you want more changes after each of those things. That would be a must-have. Whereas on the flip side, if you are the person buying, their must-haves are going to be, I want to pay X amount by X date and have all these rights on how many edits I'm going to have, and here's what I can use it for. So your needs are going to change based on what you have here and there. And again, the must-have would be don't use it commercially. The number of edits might be a want-to-have. If they say, well, I'd really like to get 2 rounds of edits because I don't always notice things the first time, that might be something you give in on. So, yeah, and that is the quick and dirty on contracts. I'm very happy to answer specific questions on that because it is a little late and I'm having trouble coming up with specific examples. On the online business, the local business requirements, that depends on your locality. Online business versus in-person business. Generally, if you're, let's say you're based here in Duval County in Jacksonville, yes, you would have to, what you would have to do is, if we're talking business operating, we're just talking operating within Florida, online business, you would have to get a local business tax receipt in Duval County because you are located here. Where it gets more interesting is when you are a local business operating nationwide, like some artists are, then you do become subject to certain laws. You don't necessarily become subject to things like local business tax receipts, but you do become subject to tax laws. If you go and you make money from a Californian, are you subject to California taxes? That's a question for the CPA. But what you certainly are is you may be subject to privacy laws in that state. Almost certainly not for California. Don't worry, don't freak out if you're a small business. But there are laws that may apply across state lines on that sort of thing. What you will be subject to is state tax on the actual amount. You charge $100 for a drawing to someone in California, then you're going to have to collect and remit or require the person who bought it from you to pay state sales tax on that art. And it's not, a lot of people don't do it. This is why things like Patreon have been adding that requirement in where you have to collect the state sales tax. Florida actually has kind of screwed up, and right now we don't have that law on the books. Our law says that if you have a physical presence in Florida, you have to pay the sales tax on sales to Florida residents. So Amazon, you have warehouses in Florida, you have to collect Florida sales tax on all sales you make here. That's a relic of old laws and will probably be changed. But for now, people like Patreon do not collect Florida sales tax. So, yeah, so Alan, this is another good point with a contract. If you're living in Florida and your business is based in Florida, but you're customers in Texas, one of the things you'd probably want to make sure you have in there is a choice of law clause that says this contract will be governed under Florida law, not Texas law. Now, this doesn't get you out of things like Texas sales tax requirements, but it does make sure that your contract will be judged under the laws here in Florida, everything about that. Certain things about whether or not there's certain warranties about how the goods are made. Those would be subject to Florida law and not Texas law. And generally, it's better if you're subject to your home state's law, because then you can hire local lawyers, and it's a lot cheaper for you if you were ever to get sued. Yeah, so Florida has no state income tax. Florida has no exempts S corporations, but it's funny you mentioned that, and this is something I want to bring up too. Leases. If you're leasing physical space, Florida collects sales tax on rent. And so if you're a landlord, you have to collect sales tax on business rent. And Florida is very, very insistent about this because it's one of their biggest things that they do. Also, if you make a loan to somebody, you will have, and if you have a mortgage, you've seen this, a promissory note. On that note, there are documentary stamp taxes. That's another big moneymaker for Florida. And so you want a lawyer or somebody to help you find those problems or help you identify those issues before they come up. Pseudonyms have validity in contract. No. You have to be able to identify the person. And honestly, if you have a contract, you need a real name. You can include in there, also known as Brother Flounder, but you need to have the actual legal name in the contract or some other specific identifier. It's at least I would say that you do. And especially, if they object, you're probably already collecting payment information through PayPal or a credit card provider and something like that. Tell them, look, you're giving it to the credit card provider. You need to give it to me as well. I'm not going to go out and say who you are, but in the contract, you do need the legal name. Because and with that, I think it makes sense because you need to know who the other person is, and you want to know, and it's as much for them as it is for you. If you weren't a business, and if I wanted to contract with Jeremy to go and do something, if Jeremy Fairytale, who's Jeremy Fairytale, but Jeremy Fairytale Arts Inc. is somebody that I know. I can track them down because they're registered with the state of Florida. Recommendations for reserving a name. You can reserve a name. The state of Florida allows you to file a name reservation. Generally, you can do it. If it's something that you think might get used, then you can certainly do it, pay the fee to do it. I haven't done name reservations in a long time, but that's because when they come to me, really we file the articles of incorporation or organization pretty quickly and figure out the rest of the agreement later. Not too much later, but we do try to get that ball rolling. If you are concerned about that, then yes, Florida and some other states will allow you to pay a fee to reserve a name online, and I don't remember how long it's good for, I'm afraid. Yes, Fiverr, yay, good, excellent. That's another thing with it can get interesting when you're dealing with when you're in the United States, when you're dealing with people from overseas. There's a whole lot more potential problems there. And some of this, I'm going to be honest, some of these things are they're more important for $1,000, $2,000 fursuit than they are for a $80, $100 commission, an art commission. Maybe if you're a buyer, you don't necessarily care about that. And what you can do instead, you don't have to have the specific terms of service, the specific huge contract that they sign every time, but you can link to a terms of service on your commission page and say, this is what it's gonna be, is what you're agreeing to when you pay me the money. Yeah, Texas has some interesting stuff. Texas is the only state in the country where you have to know oil and gas law to pass the bar exam, interestingly enough. Oh, lawyers. Okay, real quick. I am licensed in Florida and Georgia. I cannot practice in other states because I'm not licensed there, and each state has their own bar association that licenses lawyers to practice in that jurisdiction. And so I can help you with, if you're based in Florida and Georgia, I can help you with laws elsewhere and businesses elsewhere and write contracts for you. But if you are not based in these states, if you do not have a Florida or Georgia corporation, then I can't help you that. I can't go to Illinois and set up an Illinois company with an Illinois contract. Any more questions here for you? For me? Yeah, so Fiverr, this is part of our state versus federal distinction. State, a lot of these sorts of things with medicine as well, education, a lot of licensure requirements are left to the state governments and not to the federal government. In fact, most of them are state. Lawyers are pretty unique in that we're one of the only professions where you can't usually take your law degree or bar registration from one state to another. Most other professions allow you to do that. It's always been a big point of debate in the legal community, and COVID is really starting to put pressure on it because of the bar exam that most of them have to pass. And so there's going to be a lot of interesting developments on that in the next year or so. Siru, yes, this will be posted somewhere. I don't have a clue where, but stay posted, watch the Twitter, probably on the YouTube page, I would imagine. Yes, it's yeah, Fiverr, you can contact me at, let's see. Probably the best address for the moment, or you can contact me.com. Yeah, international law is a pain, frankly. Just hope they're in Canada. Really is the big hope there. Hope they're if you're based in the United States, hope that they are in a system that's based on British law. So, any more questions? Looks like we're about out of time. All right. Well, thank you for coming. I hope this helped. And for those of you in the future, I've put my email in the chat. You can contact me, brotherflounder@gmail.com, and feel free to shoot me any questions you may have. And I hope to talk with or see some of you around later at the lawyer panel. We are going to have legal horror stories at 11 o'clock tonight. So thank you very much.